Again, my name is Daphne Tong-Pave. I am the co-executive director of the Native Hawaiian Organizations Association, or NHOA, along with Shannon Edie, who's also here today. She does serve in the capacity as co-executive director as well. We just want to sincerely thank NCAIED for coming all the way out to Honolulu, Hawaii, and sponsoring NEI and inviting NHOA to participate. I think, unfortunately, because we're so far from the continent, we're often left behind and kind of overlooked. So we really appreciate these opportunities where we can learn, connect, and grow. We also want to thank John Shiraka for coming out here. You're always so gracious with your time and sharing your experiences and expertise with us. It's really been instrumental, not just for NHOA, but I think the small business community generally. So thank you. NHOA, just as background, is a trade association. We currently have 21 active members. Similar to tribes and ANCs, NHOs do participate in the 8A program and utilize federal contracting to generate revenues to support the Native community. Unfortunately, we aren't exactly on the same footing as tribes and ANCs. There's not complete parity, which may be attributed to, Native Hawaiians being one of the younger indigenous groups in terms of federal recognition. We don't have a federally recognized governing entity. So again, kind of our location and I think the lack of federal recognition, Native Hawaiians are often, not included in important discussions. So we really appreciate, NCAID making the effort to come out here and including us as we all work together for our Native communities. So thank you again for being here. We look forward to continuing to partner with you.
Again, my name is Marchand. I'm Vice President of the National Center. I've been on board about 3 years now. I'm also a member of the Colville Confederated Tribes in Washington State. I'm also their chairman now of gaming for Colville as of October. And so I've been in that position for a few months. But this is a special moment for NCID. We haven't been out here in 50 years as an organized actual event taking place. We have been visiting the island several times on different events and conferences and stuff like that, but not actually hosting an event out here. So a little bit of background on this program. Our NEI's Native Edge Institute started about 3 years ago. And so we got funding from SBA, MBDA, Wells Fargo Foundation, Key Bank Foundation, Alaskan Airlines, a variety of other entities to start this program. Pretty much 3 years ago, we've been doing these one-day workshops around the country. Before COVID, it was pretty much once a month. And so we travel all around the country, host them in, for example, in Porch Creek, Alabama, Alaska, Seattle, Spokane, Washington, where else has been San Diego, Albuquerque. So they've been all over the place. Once COVID hit, we went all virtual at that point. And then at some point, I think it was in January of 2021, we went to this hybrid approach. And so now we have these online as well as in person. They've been averaging about 25 people per event, I think, in the last few events we've had, Choctaw, Alaska, and Seattle, and now this one. So this one was a little more tougher, I think, with getting into the island. So we wanted to do more of a virtual one. So these guys, with Riley and Patrick, both from Skyber Media. So they're a Native American-owned company out of Olympia, correct, Trent? And so they do most of our filming on most of these events. And so they'll be editing this one. It'll be shown, I think, September 14th. And so it'll probably, roughly when it's broken down, probably be a 4 or 5 hour actual training thing we put online. But this one is in particular hosted by SBA 7J. And so that is right now a 5-year grant. We just got renewed again. So we got 3 more years after this. I'm heavily interested in the trade aspect of this because it hasn't been announced, so don't put it in the film. But MBDA just awarded us a new traded grant. And so we'll be leading the effort nationally for Alaska Native, Native American, and Native Hawaiian on trade now going forward. So I think I'll have a conversation with you before this day ends. But I thank everybody for being here. We appreciate your attendance. And I'll turn it over to John, I think, for the next few hours.
Thanks everybody for being here today. I wanted to talk about mentor-protege joint venture, changes in the rules, current trends. There is a presentation that I had made at the Reservation Economics Summit that talks about entity-owned sort of for newer entities. So there's a lot of tribes that are entering the program. There's a lot of NHOs that are entering the program. So structure, making sure, what to address, what to look for creating efficiencies. And so that's an important aspect as well. But we can talk about any of those things. What I wanted to start with is sort of just where federal procurement has been over the last several years, right? The dollar amount with respect to federal procurement has actually been going significantly higher, right? Even when you look at percentages with respect to performance, the federal government is performing well against those goals. However, that doesn't mean that there aren't significant challenges for participating in the marketplace, especially for newer entrants, right? So we have an environment where, and we'll talk about this, right? We have an environment where we're seeing a lot of bundled requirements, consolidations, best-in-class requirements, category management, and that creates challenges for newer entrants. If you don't have some of those vehicles, if you don't have the track record, new entrants have been significantly impacted by the direction the federal government has gone in the past few years. And then the other thing to sort of keep an eye on is that a significant portion of the spend over the last couple of years has been COVID related, right? So even though as soon as COVID hit, at least for us, and we worked with the National Center through this, a lot of clients immediately reacted as though there's going to be a tightening of the marketplace. And although initially there was a bit of tightening, right, because there were security facilities, clearance issues, can you work from home, those types of things sort of created a tightening of the marketplace. But eventually we actually saw growth for a lot of our clients. We saw significant opportunities to sort of pivot. The federal government pivoted with respect to off-site work, et cetera. The one challenge that was identified, and we'll talk about this sort of the rule changes, was that for, again, new entrants, if you didn't have those relationships to build on, so if you had the relationships, you had contracts, you had work with the federal government needed you during COVID and the CARES Act and everything, so you most likely had the relationships to leverage that. If you were new, you didn't have the opportunity to go to the matchmaking, build relationships, et cetera, and that didn't really occur that well. Although agencies attempted to do that on a virtual basis, it didn't work quite as well as the rapport and building relationships one-on-one. So the impact really significantly was for the newer entrants in federal contracting. If we look at, this is sort of intuitive, right? So if you look at where the largest growth was between 19 and 20, it was medical. Why? Because of COVID and all the PPE and all the response to COVID and the CARES Act. There was significant dollar spend under research and development, and then professional services is always high, and IT services is always high. When you look at sort of what we at least perceive with respect to where the marketplace is going to go, professional services is always high, but when you talk about IT infrastructure and cybersecurity and the requirements around the federal government with respect to cybersecurity, there's significant consensus, at least, that there'll be significant additional spend in information technology. And then this is just the trends over the last several years. Any questions or comments so far before we sort of talk about, and priorities is misspelled. I apologize. I did that because I changed that slide cover. Any questions so far or comments on where we've been, the goals? I'll talk a little bit about, we've all heard about goals going up, right? The administration has potentially at least suggested that they are for increasing small business goals. And that's been sort of working its way through the Hill, and we can talk a little bit about what that might look like. But anything else on sort of trends? The question was, it's been a challenge over the last several years to develop the relationships because of COVID. What are the agencies going to do, or what are they doing to address that in the near future? So it's interesting that you say that, because at the Reservation Economics Summit, there was also a panel of small business directors. And every single one of them spoke to the administration priority to cast a broader net and spoke to engaging more broadly with small businesses. And then the other thing they spoke to is the challenges they face with respect to category management. So it's very clear that the OSBU directors have direction from the administration to cast a broader net and engage. The challenge, though, is that they have plans, but now with COVID, I don't know, restarting or getting more active, or we're regressing with respect to requirements, it's unsure how they're going to implement those plans, right? There's been significant discussions about bringing non-traditional players into the marketplace. There's been significant discussion in bringing newer entrants, government contractors into the marketplace, and innovative companies. And so they have a mandate to go out and reach out and presumably do more matchmaking and events. However, that was early summer. Things have changed since early summer. A good question. Any other questions or comments so far on where we are? Yep.
And then the FAR is taking another 2 or 3 years, if not longer, to be safe with the sea bars.
Yep. You haven't seen this before, have you? So that's absolutely right? So it's really important, even though the administration, and you're right, the National Defense Authorization Act, even of 14, 15, 16, they all had really good provisions for engaging small businesses more, right? And leveling the playing field. But it takes a lot of time for that to actually make its way into the regulations, right? So in this chart, like the one thing that I always point to is that policies can happen relatively quickly, right? If the agency has a particular initiative with a policy and the administration supports it, it can be implemented relatively quickly. The one thing that I always complain about is category management never went through the statutory process, right? It never went through the regulatory process. It was just a policy that was established with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy and OMB. They all seemed to like it at the time, and they began implementing it. So in my mind, that was almost a circumvention of public dialogue and public engagement in the rulemaking process. So yes, it is a long process, but it helps to get the public engaged, right? So when it starts, as Raymond just mentioned, when it starts with a National Defense Authorization or a CARES Act or anything else that might be moving forward, it usually takes, unless it's clear, unless Congress's direction is clear and has little room for interpretation, it has to go through the entire regulatory process, right? And that can take sometimes up to 48 months, if not longer. I'll give you an example, the All Small Mentor Protege Program, right? That was the Small Business Jobs Act of 2010, right? And we started working on that in 2010. We had a draft regulation to implement that by 2013. Then the Hill said, oh, wait a second, it's not just for HUBZone, service disabled, women owned, it should be for all small businesses. So we had to pull that regulation back. Then it took another 36 months. We didn't implement that program until the fall of 2016. So that was roughly 6 years, right? And the rulemaking process, to a certain degree, it's positive because it goes through interagency clearance and it has 90 days for comments. Then it comes back and then you redraft it. And then it goes for public comment. And the public has an opportunity, like the different associations, the National Center has an opportunity to comment and it's 90 days and then it comes back and you redraft it. Then the final rule goes out to interagency one more time. And oftentimes there are challenges from the DoD and others with respect to the small business program. So that takes a lot of negotiation before you have a final rule that you can implement. So when you talk about, there's these rules that are changing. Now, clearly, if it's a goaling thing, that's pretty clear. It's very similar to when we implemented the sole source provisions for the Women-Owned Small Business Program. We were able to implement that within 45 days from the statute because intentions of Congress was pretty clear. However, in contrast, we had the requirement for women-owned small businesses to get certified like 8A and HUBZone. That wasn't very clear because there was a discussion about, can the state do it? Can third-party certifiers do it? Will the SBA charge? So that went through an entire discussion internally, regulatory process, et cetera. That didn't happen until last July, I think it was, and became effective in October. So when folks talk about changes in statute, we need to be cognizant of the fact that it's not going to necessarily happen immediately, right? And quite frankly, it actually gives us an opportunity to frame how it's going to be implemented. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that how it gets implemented is really critical. Because if your voice doesn't get heard in the way it gets implemented, in actuality, it can end up negatively impacting the community. And I'll give you an example there, right? So, and this is another thing that the administration is looking at, which I'll go back to. This is another thing that the administration is looking at, right? So making sure that racial equity and support is provided through all of the agencies and all of the programs. It was one of the first executive orders that came out. And under that, the issue of, well, we should increase the 8A SDB goal to 15%. However, there's a lot of discussions on how that's going to be implemented, right? Right now, there's significant discussions on, well, if we're going to increase the 8A goal, and by the way, it's not just 8A, it's 8A small disadvantaged business, and you guys know you can be 8A certified and self-represent as an SDV, but there's no SDV set-aside program. But if we're going to increase the 8A goal to 15%, the discussion has been, well, should it be for individual companies? Because those support a lot of minority groups, as opposed to entity-owned. Entity-owned already have significant advantages. They can have multiple 8As. They can have unlimited sole source, back office shared services, which creates efficiencies. So maybe there should be a way of increasing the goal, but making sure that the goal increase is for individually owned firms. That was a discussion that was on the Hill with respect to implementation of this. So as advocates for the community, we need to be aware of those types of discussions and make sure that our perspective is represented on the Hill. And the one thing that I always say to that, having ran the programs and having been out in the community, is that the entity-owned program, the Native program, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, tribal, supports entire communities, right? They don't support an individual. And so that's why there's differences with the program. And you can't pit one version of the program against the other. That's just going to create more friction. And then when we talk about increasing the goal, the other thing to be concerned about is you don't necessarily just want to increase the goal for the 8A and SDB, because that's going to leave behind the SDV OSBs, the women-owned and the hub zone. So let's take a look at it holistically to see if we can increase the entire small business goal and then each of those proportionately. So that discussion has been going on the Hill, and it's important to sort of understand that perspective. The other thing that this looks at with respect to federal programs is what kind of barriers are within the programs that are supposed to quote unquote help, yet create a barrier for growth. Give you an example. Any other type of company, women-owned, hub zone, service disabled, vanilla small, non-small, they have the ability to grow their companies and sell them and benefit from that growth, right? They create generational wealth. You get to the 8A program, to protect the 8A participants, there is provisions that restrict the ability of an 8A company to sell and benefit from their growth. Now, I understand the whole question of, well, you can't sell your 8A contracts to Lockheed Martin because they're set aside, but there should be a streamlined ability to benefit from what you've grown, to be able to sell it, as long as it's going to another qualified participant, without having to hire lawyers and accountants and consultants like us to figure out the waiver process or the change of ownership process and take 3, 6, 9, 12 months to get the process done. That's another type of barrier that they should be looking at. The other one is, the highest paid question for individual firms. The participant that's responsible or entered into the program has to, quote unquote, be the highest paid. In today's environment, a principal oftentimes has to go out and hire BD folks that are super expensive, has to go out and hire cybersecurity folks that are highly expensive. They're competing against AECOM and Deloitte and all the other firms that are able to capture the best talent in the marketplace. Yet we hinder 8A companies to be able to capture the best talent. And then we say, well, why aren't they growing and why aren't they graduating effectively? And how come they're not effectively graduating and falling off the cliff? So there are restrictions like that quote unquote were put into place to protect the participant, where in actuality, they hinder their ability to grow and generate wealth, not just for the communities, but for individually ones, the intended underlying population. I think for the current environment, what's really important, and this is one of the trends, is on the executive order, I think it's really important for the community to make sure that we're commenting on this. So every agency is supposed to draft up recommendations. And the SBA is going through that right now, by the way. Every agency is supposed to determine where the potential barriers are blocking, unintentionally sometimes, right? Are blocking the programs. And then do we have to create new policies? Do we have to rewrite the regs? And then how do we engage the communities, the underserved communities, in order to make sure that we understand what the problems are. So I'd encourage the community to engage the SBA to make sure that we have a voice in how this is addressed. Because I know, like, the Hispanic Chamber is doing that. The Black Chamber is doing that. And some of the issues or some of the recommendations are common, right? They can be common to each different group, but some of them aren't. So it's important to address that. And then the other thing that came out under the executive order, the administration's really going to focus on making sure that contractors provide and adhere to the Made in America rule. And there was a lot of consternation about that because what kind of impact is that going to have for me with respect to my provision of services to the federal government? IT is a major issue with any Chinese or unapproved sources, especially with respect to hardware, but now even especially to software. And so that was a big question. In implementation, though, at least so far, it has been really making sure that agencies are following the existing rules. So two things. One is they created an office in OMB, the Made in America office, and every request for an exemption from Made in America goes to that office. It has to be transparent, so they're supposed to publish it. And then they're supposed to also publish, hey, did we approve this or did we not approve this? And then ultimately, every agency is supposed to do a review of how they've been implementing Made in America and determine, hey, is there a reason why the FAR needs to be amended to ensure that we're implementing this correctly? Or has it just been a case of the rules are there, the regulation is there, the statute's there, we've just been ignoring it, so this transparency will help us do it better. Again, information technology is a major issue. And then the last thing that I'd just point to is that they're even looking at products and services that are provided to the public through the federal government. So like park services. That's one example I always give, right? So are the straws and cups and all those things, where are those coming from? Are those made in America, and is there an exemption if they're not? And who requested the exemption? So look for that It hasn't significantly changed how the federal government is doing work with respect to that right now, but there is a potential for change depending on the findings in the assessments that they do. With respect to the Biden administration trend, one is what we talked about, right? Racial equity. Are the programs serving their purposes? Are there any unintentional barriers that were placed in these programs? One of the things that's really interesting, if you listen in on some of the discussions in the administration, the question isn't, hey, did someone overtly try to make this program bad? It's, hey, is there unintentional bias when we're implementing these programs that's made this thing bad? And I'll give you an example. Unintentional bias. You're not going to guess who said this, but when I was running these programs, an individual, I won't even tell you, well, you're going to find out which program it is. An individual comes into my office and says, oh my gosh, the last thing we need is for an 8A participant to buy a mansion on the Potomac. That's going to end up on the front page of the Washington Post. It's like, why? Isn't that the intent of the program? Aren't these guys supposed to get rich? I mean, doesn't the guy that runs Lockheed, I'm sure he lives on the Potomac. So it was like, there's that unintentional, like, wait a second, is that right? These guys got rich off these programs. Isn't that the intent of it? And I think that unintentional bias creates an environment where we put restrictions that bind the hands of the small businesses, the participants, in growing it and selling it and benefiting from it. And not just individually owned, but even in the native owned communities. Okay, category management. Everybody familiar with category management? Yes, okay. So just real quick, look, the federal government, and this was during the Obama administration. I was a political appointee during the Obama administration. There was a lot of discussion about the impact and the challenges with respect to implementing category management. One of the things was that, look, the federal government was buying the same product from the same company, same product, same service, and in one instance was paying here, in another instance it was paying here. And there was no contracts that matched the same delivery, schedule, price, anything. And they were like, this doesn't make sense. We should have more common procurement for the same product from the same vendor. And so category management initially came out as strategic sourcing. And strategic sourcing in the basic form was, let's set up these huge vehicles, and I always say the widget vehicle, right? And there'll be 7 contract holders, and every time the federal government buys widgets, they'll go to those contract holders, they'll buy on volume, bring down the prices, and we'll do great, just like Walmart. Well, the challenge was, what happens to all the thousands of other small businesses, or businesses, except for those 7, that were selling widgets to the federal government? They'd be out of business, at least for the next 5 years. And who knows, option period, maybe the next 10 years. That was a challenge. So then they said, okay, and by the way, the SBA was on the Category Management Leadership Council, CMLC. I was the voting member on that. And every time a new vehicle would come up to either set up the vehicle or the agency commit to that vehicle, I would vote no. And so, and of course our administrator supported it. So I digress, but we have a little bit of time. One day I got a call from OFPP and they said, hey, we're gonna have another vote. You're coming? And I said, yeah. And they said, well, you gotta vote no. You gotta vote yes. And I was like, then I'm not coming. And they said, no, the OMB director wants you to be here. You gotta show up. I said, okay. And they said, well, are you gonna vote yes? And I said, no, I'm gonna vote no. And they were like, you can't do that. And so I said, okay, I'm not going. So this went back and forth, and I hang up the phone, and 5 minutes later I get a call from someone a little bit more senior. Eventually they were like, you have to come. So I was like, okay, I gotta go. I don't know if you guys know Ken Dodds. Ken Dodds used to work for me in the Office of Policy. I go, Ken, you gotta go with me. We had to go to the White House. I go, Ken, you gotta go with me. So Ken's like, what am I gonna do? I'm not gonna go with you. I was like, you sit behind me. You'll be like support. And so we go into the office, there's this big table, the OMB director and all these generals and heads of agencies, and I'm sitting at the end, and they start taking the vote. and they go around, and I was sitting right across from the director, and they go around, and everybody's yes, 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 yes. And so it comes to me, and deputy director is sitting right across from me, staring at me, and she goes, SBA? I'm like, man, I don't know what to do. So I was like, abstain. And Ken's like, what the heck? What was that? So a little bit after that, I got called to the principal's office. I had to go to the administrator's office. Deputy director of OMB came over, got yelled at, and then the SBA became a non-voting member of the CMLC shortly after that. And since then, they've been a non-voting member. But so it transitioned a little bit, at least, right? So it went from strategic sourcing to category management. And category management was, hey, it's not always going to be a new vehicle. Let's figure out what existing vehicles are out there. Let's put, level 1, level 2, level 3. You have to commit. It's optional. It's government-wide. And let's share terms and prices so that the government can buy more efficiently. However, at the end of the day, I think our collective experience has been, it really has been driving requirements to the best-in-class vehicles. And so what does that do? By the way, in 2017, Bloomberg did a study that said 84,000 contracts were going to be pulled up, which actually happened over the next 3 years, worth $32 billion to go in the best-in-class vehicles. So what does that mean? What did that happen? What happened? By the way, these are the categories, and it's basically almost every category that the federal government purchases material in. These are the best-in-class vehicles. You can't see that, but I'm going to do from current slide. Maybe you can see that better, a little bit better. These will be available. Okay, so what's happened? Now, these are the businesses in the top 35 districts. So think DC, think like maybe San Diego, think like around the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, or Wright-Patterson, yeah, Air Force, I think that's Air Force, right? Wright-Patterson. So the top 35 districts, they got a lot of money. Everybody else kind of leveled out over the last several years. And then here's the federal supplier base. These are the number of small businesses participating in federal contracting. So year over year, it's gone down with a number of individual small businesses receiving contracts. Then barriers to entry. These are new entrants coming into the federal government, right? And then lastly, this was the question with respect to where did those 84,000 contracts come from? 47% of them came from large contractors. 53% of them came from small contractors. So as those requirements were getting pulled and put on best-in-class vehicles, it had a more significant impact on small businesses and large businesses. So one of the things that the government has been looking at and the SBA has been trying to focus on is, okay, well, what are the best? So two things. One is the current administration, at least their posture so far, has been that we're not going to be category management friendly, at least on the Small Business Administration side, right? So I think we have friends there. However, there is conflicting interests, both at the GSA and at OMB, that like category management, right? Because in their mind, it creates efficiencies. And in their mind, buying like industry is a positive thing because they'll bring down prices. In the long term, I think they're starting to realize that it does impact the industrial base. It does impact your supply chain. It does impact competition and competitiveness. But the entrenched faction, if you can call it that, also sees it as a way of making revenue. So, GSA, when they put a task order on a schedule or on some of the best-in-class vehicles, they receive a fee. And so they get a benefit from that. There's entrenched interest in leaving it as it is. The last thing that I'd say is, so if it's going, the train's going down the track, hopefully SBA will be able to sort of either derail it or address it. But some of the things that can be done to address the situation, or at least to lessen the impact, is making sure that they're on and off ramps, right? So even some of the best-in-class vehicles, their on and off ramps don't happen very often. I know Oasis, this just did, and CIOS P4, is that what we're on now? That just had a rebid. But making sure that they're on and off ramps, and when a small business, because there's few small businesses on there, right? You're not gonna be small for very long once you get one of the best-in-class vehicles, or quote unquote, one of the golden tickets. So is there an off ramp? Like, can you automatically be off ramp to the full and open, and then have openings for new entrants? Is there small business tracks, right? So do we have all the socio categories so that the contracting officer can set it aside for the right socio categories if they're not meeting their goals? And then the other part of it is, if small business new entrants are sort of relinquished to, is that the right terminology? If small businesses are left to being subcontractors, right? Is there a really strong subcontracting plans? And is there transparent tracking? So subcontracting plans and implementation are not very transparent in the federal government. I don't know if you guys are aware, but you have, when it comes to prime contracting data, you have all the FBDS data, what's now SAM and USA Spend. When it comes to subcontracting data, you have ESRS, which is a black box. You don't have access to it. You can't do due diligence on it. You can't tear it apart and see who's giving what subcontracts to what amount, and are they really adhering to their subcontracting plans. There's been statutory changes around consolidation and bundling and requirements for reporting. So SBA needs to be able to monitor that and make sure that there's adherence to that. And there should be PCR reviews when there is consolidation and bundling. And then the last thing that I'll throw in there, and I don't know how many folks are aware of this, is the SBIR program, so the Small Business Innovation Research Program. SBIR, if you have some sort of innovation, it doesn't have to be a product. It can be a process or a service, innovative service. SBIR fund grantees or awardees. As you know, the first phase used to be 250,000. I think it's gone up to 500,000. Second phase used to be $1 million. I think it's 2. You get grants from the federal government, right? However, a lot of folks don't know this. Phase 3 is you have the authority to sole source that service or product back to the government. So it acts very, and a lot of contracting officers don't like using that tool. They have access to it. So educating the contracting officer on that is important, but making sure that the community is aware of the SBIR program and the ability to use it as a sole source tool is also important. The other thing that has become more easily manageable, and I know that NHOA was concerned about this, I know the community is concerned about this, is pulling requirements out of the 8A program and dropping it into one of the best-in-class vehicles. So the recent SBA regulations made it more clear as to what an existing requirement is, because a lot of times contracting officers were saying, oh, that's a new requirement. Well, what exactly is a new requirement? It's not, it's not clear as one would like, but it's significantly more clear. So has the scope changed significantly? Has the magnitude of the contract changed significantly? And then is the end user changed? If any of those things are true, then it's a new requirement. And why is that important? Is because if it's an existing requirement, it has to stay in the 8A program. And then the other thing that they focused on in the new rules is that even if you're going to leave it in the 8A program, but put it on a best-in-class vehicle, you have to prove that you've done some sort of economic analysis with respect to the impact on the incumbent. And what is that going to do to the incumbent? The other thing that you just need to be concerned about, though, is that follow-on sole source can't be awarded to a sister company, right? So that's the negative part of it. Because a lot of times contracting officers would say, oh, this is a new requirement. I won't give it to, because this is a graduated 8A entity. This is the sister company. I'll go ahead and give it to the sister company because it's a new requirement. If it's not a new requirement, you can't give it to the sister company. You're supposed to allow other participants to be able to receive that award. So you don't capture it with one entity for life.
Criteria in there based on 2-year separation, different next code that they come out.
Yeah, so you can bring in, so Raymond mentions sister companies and same NAICS codes. So you are restricted as entity owned. You can't have, let's say, I don't know, it's 541611. You can't have that NAICS code, graduate, and immediately start 541611 again. There has to be a 2-year window for creating that new entity. It can be something close, but it has to be a 2-year window. Now, as long as you pass that 2-year, there's still this restriction, though, on passing along the same contract to that sister company. They'd have to prove that it's a new requirement that's going to the sister company. And then the last thing, since you brought that up, and I know I'm jumping everywhere, but the last thing I'd say is on the sister companies, there's a lot of management that goes into strategizing how to establish and time those sister companies. For entities like, large Alaskan Native corporations, they have, sometimes I've seen like a wall full of like a diagram of, we'll finish on this one in this year, we'll wait the 2 years. However, we have a close NAICS code here, and timing is really critical. And then matching your backlog and your pipeline is critical to be able to monitor when you'll have another entity up that can potentially capture those requirements. So that becomes really important. We can talk a little bit about that in a little bit also. So what do you do, right? So in this environment, first of all, one is advocate as a community that category management is negative and it hurts small businesses. It hurts the industrial base. It's a lose-lose for the government and for businesses. And quite frankly, the government, a lot of times I'd have this argument with folks at the GSA. They're like, hey, wait a second, we're just trying to be like Walmart and benefit our stockholders, right? The taxpayer is our stockholder. We're trying to benefit them. Like, no, you actually have the Small Business Act that requires you to benefit the greater population. The buying, federal government buying isn't like Walmart buying, right? You have a requirement to spend in such a way that increases the industrial base, increases competitiveness, and grows the small business economy. If you look at the Small Business Act, I'm sure that's almost exactly what it says. And so you aren't required by statute to buy like Walmart and for the stockholders' benefit. You're actually required to support the small business economy. Yes, you want to try and do it the best you can. And even the Small Business Act, when it talks about the rule of two, it doesn't say at the best price. It says at a reasonable price. So presumably, you can pay more than market rate if it's going to significantly impact your industrial base, the small business economy, et cetera. So you have a different mandate than the board of directors of Walmart when you're doing procurement. So having said that, let's hope that there is pressure to minimize category management. But some of the things that you really need to look at is, for a period of time, even sophisticated, Alaskan Native corporations, NHOs, were getting sort of blindsided by requirements getting pulled out, right? So I remember last year at the National 8A conference, we had a session just on bless you, just on category management. And someone was like, yeah, we didn't even know until the contracting officer said, oh, that's on OASIS. We're like, what? So you should have discussions with your contracting officer on, hey, I'm doing this requirement. And by the way, the contracting officer was super satisfied with this firm. They just were told we needed to increase category management goals. You got to pull this requirement and put it under category management. So have that discussion with your contracting officer. Say, hey, are any of these requirements going over, and on what vehicle? And then, do I have that vehicle, or do we have that vehicle? And then a lot of firms have looked at, can we do acquisition, right? So when we talk about graduating 8As, do they have the right vehicles, right? Do they have a CIOSP4? Do they have a STARS 3? Do they have an OASIS? They might be a good target for an acquisition because I inherently grow that through acquisition rather than growing it organically. And then the other thing that you have to just be aware is that, and we'll talk about this when we come back, maintaining small business status on an IDIQ and a Gwac. So once you are acquired or merged, you want to make sure that you can still recertify to your size and to the status of that contract, right? So we talked about that earlier. 8A acquisition, you're being acquired, change of ownership. Can you still recertify to 8A status? And after a merger or acquisition, you have to recertify your size. So is that going to change? Because you can grow organically once you have a Gwac. There's some new restrictions, and we'll talk about that. But basically, if you have STARS 3 and you grow organically, you're okay for the 5-year periods of STARS 3. Do an acquisition, post-acquisition or merger, you got to recertify your size standards. So you got to be careful of that impact of that. And then the last thing is, look, so if we know the requirements are going over to OASIS, who has OASIS? Who's a good partner? We're the incumbent. We can bring all our work and past performance to that partnership. Let's do a joint venture, or let's do a prime sub. We'll bring the requirements, we'll bring the past performance, we can partner up, and at least we can participate to some extent in the follow-on on that requirement if it's going to an OASIS. So I did want to talk about the regulatory changes. I know most of you have probably seen a lot of these things. The MPA program was consolidated, which was a good thing in my mind, but that has certain impacts. And there were some improvements to the program, at least in my mind. So we can talk a little bit about that and see if there's any questions on that. And then with respect to joint ventures, there were some changes in the 8A program. So we might want to talk a little bit about that. And then lastly, just real quick about the mentor-protege joint venture program, sort of why is that important in this current environment, especially if we see consolidation in best-in-class vehicles. What is the market trend, and what do we see a lot in the marketplace? So the consolidation, I mean, everybody's sort of aware of the 8A program. Used to happen at the district office, the mentor-protege. There was the all-small that was happening at headquarters. There was a lot of confusion. That program was consolidated to basically have one all-small mentor-protege program. It all happens on certified.sba. And then, you know, whatever the designations of the protege are, flow to the MPA, or basically to any joint ventures that are created under that. The one thing that is interesting, or at least helpful in my mind, was the 3-2 rule was always confusing. Like 3 contracts in 2 years, when does the clock start? Do I continue getting contracts after the 3rd one if bids are out? So it just changed to the 2 rule, right? So basically, if you create a joint venture, the clock doesn't start until the first contract award, right? And then you have a 2-year period. And the other thing that you should be aware of is that once your 2-year period is over, if you have outstanding opportunities out, right, you can still accept those. You just can't continue to bid after that 2-year period. And then the other interesting part that I found helpful, because a lot of things were getting stuck at the district office, is pre-approvals for joint venture agreements, right? So it used to be that any 8A requirement required the approval. Now it is any sole source requirement requires the approval. The one thing we always tell our clients is have your package ready anyways. By the way, every district office has a different requirement on what that joint venture package should look like. We've had discussions with headquarters. Raymond, I think you've had discussions with headquarters with respect to what really needs to be in joint venture package. I mean, sometimes you get a list that's this long, sometimes you get a list that's this long. And so they're trying to create unified requirements around the country. But one thing we tell clients is this, even if it's not a sole source requirement, make sure you have a package put together, because if it gets protested, you're gonna be able to send that package in. So, you know, they ask for the Form 355, they ask for the joint venture operating agreement, they ask for each of the firm's corporate docs. Have the list and have that prepared in case there's a requirement to send it in. And then the other thing that I'd put in, sort of put a bug in your ear on, is that make sure the joint venture operating agreement is drafted in a way that would pass compliance, even though it doesn't need approval from the SBA, right? And you know, especially on an all small or a woman-owned or a hub zone, those don't have to go for approval, but they can get protested. And so if it gets protested, it's going to go to the size office, and they're going to look through that joint venture agreement, and they're going to look at ownership, they're going to look at control, they're going to look at unanimous consent requirements. They're going to look at all those provisions in the regs that say, okay, let's crosswalk this. There are all these requirements in there. Make sure that they are, because you don't want to win a project and then get protested and then ultimately be found to be other than small. We have a case right now where it's actually a large oil producer that's mentoring a distributor. And you know, the larger firms, especially if they're really large, all of a sudden see the joint venture operating agreements on 8A requirements, and they're like, wait a second, I got to hand over the keys and no unanimous consent provisions? And they're like, I don't know, can we, you know, push a little bit here and push a little bit there? And ultimately, you know, in order to be able to get the deal done, the protege usually says, okay, and you know, you can kind of negotiate, but if it's borderline, it may not pass muster. But as long as they're aware, right, that as long as your mentor is aware, yeah, you know, you could write it this way because you don't want to give away the keys. However, we may lose on protest. And protests happen a lot. Because joint ventures are happening more and more, people that lose, or firms that lose to a joint venture, are protesting. Because they'll say, I guarantee you there's something in there that you guys messed up. So we're going to protest. They'll go to the size specialist. They'll find, you know, no unanimous consent provisions. Oh, it's unduly reliant on mentor, something, and we'll get it taken away. So make sure that even though it doesn't get approved, it is compliant. And then the last thing is, originally the SBA came out and said, you know, competitive 8A, no requirement to submit anything to the district office. Sole source 8A, submit the whole package. They've since come out and said, because contracting officers, you know, the direction from SBA was, it's just like hub zone or women-owned. You look to the protege's designation or the managing venturer's designation to determine if the joint venture is 8A, hub zone, whatever. Contracting officers were all reluctant because it was new to them. So the SBA came out with new direction saying there's certain information that you can share with your district office, even if it isn't a sole source requirement, so that they can take that information and update the SBS to indicate that that JV is indeed an 8A JV. I don't know if the local district office here has sort of shared that with you all, but the Richmond office, well, one is headquarters has sort of shared that with us. And then the Richmond office and the DC district office are now starting to accept that information in order to tag the JV as an 8A JV. This is just more sort of in-depth analysis of the extension. but I think everybody sort of knows the requirements for that by now, if you had an 8A in the program, and the fact that it was extended for a year. Okay, some of the changes with respect to the mentor-protege. So once it was consolidated, one of the things, and I'm not going to go through all of these, again, this is available, but I will go through some of these because we're almost to noon. So one of the things is there was never a provision regulatorily for nullifying or annulling a mentor-protege agreement. And as you guys know, a protege can only have 2 mentors in their entire lifetime. Now, as entity-owned firms, that's just one of the firms. So it's not as restrictive for entity-owned firms, right? Because you can have 2 mentors for your first one, 2, 2, 2, et cetera. But for individual-owned firms, you could have only 2 mentors in your entire lifetime. And a lot of times, not a lot of times, occasionally, you would run into a relationship where it just didn't work out. And you potentially would have burned your 1 of 2 mentor-protege agreements. SBA on a there was no policy around this, but they had evaluated potential requests for annulling. And if it, quote unquote, hadn't been consummated through a joint venture, they would usually, if there was a good reason, annul the MPA. But there was no clear guidance on that. So the new rule specifically says that if it's not working out, you can terminate it within 18 months and it won't count against your 2 total. And then the other part of that equation is, a mentor can have 1 but up to 3 proteges. And so mentors are selective and they want it to work out. But if it's not working out, that also allows them to move on to others. Again, the proteges are allowed through regulation now to replace a mentor if it's not working out. So if they like the mentor-protege agreement, they are halfway through it, they can, instead of trying to annul it, if they've gone past the 18 months, they can work to replace that mentor. What else is important here? We talked about that. Oh, the last thing that I'll say here is that a lot of times we've had proteges that have an issue with a mentor, but they just didn't know where to go. And the SBA would say, well, I don't know, that's a commercial relationship. We don't want to step into this. It's between 2 commercial entities. We don't have authority. So the new regs clearly allow the SBA to intervene on behalf of the protege if the mentor isn't stepping up to the agreement and providing benefits according to the agreement. The other thing that's important here, competing offers, right? So if a mentor does have 2 proteges, number 1, they're not supposed to be competitors anyways, right? You're not supposed to have, but we've been able to be a little bit creative. So even if they're in the same, let's say you have a mentor and you're doing roofing. You could argue that you have 2 roofing companies as proteges, but they're not competitors because one does it in the Northeast and the other one does it in the Southwest. So you can make that sort of argument. Or one only does it for the Department of Defense and the other one does it for civilian agencies. So competitors, it can be subjective, right? So you can try to make that argument. But definitely the SBA came out and said, look, you can't submit competing offers with 2 different proteges. So that's important to understand. Let's talk about this real quick. So we talked about GWACs earlier, right? So if you have a GWAC, it's a small business GWAC, you get it, you can grow organically over the 5 years of that GWAC, and you still can make offers and on orders issued under that GWAC, right? That's been a way for graduating from the 8A program. Let's say you get STARS 3. You graduate, you can grow organically, and you can still respond to offers under the so that's sort of your graduation strategy. A lot of 8As do that as they graduate. What the SBA came out and said, and by the way, the SBA always gets beat up on that, right? Because when you look at the number with respect to performance against the goal, critics would say, hey, wait a second, 25% of your numbers are coming from firms that are no longer small, or they've already graduated the 8A program. And the SBA would say, well, they actually won that award when they were, and these are task orders under that award. But they always got criticized. And so the new rule says that you don't have to recertify at the task order level if the requirement was already small business set aside. But there are certain GWACs that at the GWAC level is not small, it's full and open, but then you won it as a small business, but it wasn't a small business GWAC. So on those instances where the parent was not small business set aside or 8A, and if you are submitting an offer on a set aside, so they could do a set aside under this master contract, you have to recertify at the task order level. It doesn't carry you forward for the entire life of that GWAC. Does that make sense? So this is important for change of ownership. It used to be that, this is important for entity owned, right? It used to be that if you're under the umbrella and you're changing ownership, like from a holding company here to the Economic Development Authority, or you're changing it, and I know NHOs don't have holding companies, right, because you're held by the NHO. Used to be you had to get change of ownership approvals from the SBA. What the new rule says is that as long as the ultimate owner is the tribe, you no longer have to get prior approval from the SBA. And then for individually owned firms, it used to be anything over 10% had to get prior approval from the SBA with respect to change of ownership. Now it's 20%, so that was increased. And then as long as the owner's interest increases, no prior approval is required from the SBA either. So it sort of has eased up for entity-owned firms as long as they stay under the same umbrella. If there's reorganization, it's eased up for disadvantaged individuals when it comes to the threshold. It used to be 10%, now it's 20%. And then definitely as long as the interest of the owner is going up higher, the SBA thinks that's a good thing, so you don't need approval in advance. Business plans were always an issue, right? And this was a good change on the SBA part. So the SBA required an approved business plan in order to be able to benefit from the program, right? And some district offices would take forever to approve your business plan. I don't know how it worked here. I'm not pointing fingers to any particular district office, but some of them that had a high number of 8A firms took a long time. So you got into the program, you had a sole source opportunity or a competitive opportunity, you couldn't get it because your business plan wasn't approved. That was changed. Now you can receive opportunities and benefit from the program as soon as you get in. However, your business plan is due within 60 days. So they still want to see it within 60 days. They don't have to approve it. You can continue getting benefits from the program. We had one client, they submitted their business plan in September, October of last year. They didn't get questions on it until June of this year. But after November, they were able to benefit from after the rule change, they were able to benefit from the program. So thank you guys, I appreciate it. I apologize for going long. I hope this was beneficial. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
My name is Tautua Reed. I'm the chairman of Kinaole Foundation. I recently joined onto Kinaole with Ray. I acquired the company, and this was about 3 to 4 months ago, so I'm brand new to the program. But just kind of getting familiar with the NHO process and how it benefits the community and the opportunities that we have as Native Hawaiians. We're looking to make a large donation towards Kamehameha schools early next year. Recently, Kinaole Foundation donated $100,000 towards Luna Lila homes. I came from the entertainment industry. My family's works in the movie industry, and and the music industry. So I got introduced to the NHO world through some folks of mine as I was doing a lot for the community in regards to arts and music. And they explained to me the opportunity there are to be able to help on a much bigger scale. And that's the interest I took in place. And I met Ray and a few other people like Lonnie Dawson within the community. And they sort of introduced me this entire kind of the opportunity that NHOs can bring towards the community. Obviously, COVID killed the economy in a major way. Again, there's a lot of people in Hawaii who suffered financially. And, vice versa, there's a lot of people from Hawaii who were sort of, for lack of a better word, happy that they almost had their island back for a moment. But nonetheless, I think economically it hurt everybody in a major way. In my previous industry working, COVID has destroyed everything. I mean, shows are taken out, being able to connect with other artists and be able to perform and basically entertain the people of Hawaii, and it's killed it. And entertainment is a large factor for Hawaii. Singing, dance, and so it's been a struggle for a lot of the artists. There was the SBO grant that came through, so that helped a lot. Some of the EIDL programs that existed that supported some of the artists. But as things are kind of closing up, it's getting better. Seeing what the Native Alaskans have done and some of the tribal organizations, and seeing the opportunities that they've kind of created as they've been going a lot longer. I think the NHO, as I believe you said earlier, they're sort of being kind of looped in. It's becoming the norm now to add them into the conversation. And some of the meetings I've been having with GSA, some of the procurement officers, it's been exciting to kind of see that they've been putting the NHO conversation at the forefront. And so I think there's huge opportunity to, especially economically, for Native Hawaiians.
Looking at future generations down the road, I mean, that's one thing we're constantly dealing with, in the lower 48 is, I think building that next generation of talent and working in, especially like your Native Americans doing, so getting them more involved in business, economic development. And so what steps have you been involved with or your organization to look at that next generation?
I think, when Ray had the conversation with me and we discussed about kind of handing it over to the next generation, when I first entered in, most of the people within the NHO world that I've met are older. And so, for lack of a better help, they're gonna yell at me. But I think kind of bringing in a new generation and kind of educating young folks what's out there, and there are advantages to being Native Hawaiian through the struggle that and the history and the disadvantages that we have kind of growing up here and understanding the expenses and economically how almost impossible it is for us. So there are opportunities through the NHO, and kind of using that to exploit opportunities is going to be key. I think in general, Native Hawaiian owned businesses, they offer, culture, the reality, the real Hawaii. A lot of people come to Hawaii and they see it as being a vacation destination, and it's sort of portray their version of what Hawaii is. But in reality, there's a true Hawaii that exists that Native Hawaiian owned businesses understand and they push forward, and it's about seeking that. And I think coming to Hawaii, a lot of visitors and especially larger corporations who come, I think the advantage of them being able to connect with Native Hawaiians and Native Hawaiian-owned businesses and doing collabing will give them a lot more credibility amongst the community.
You talked about funding for homes, I guess, and then just driving around the island for the last couple of days, and I think I mentioned to a couple of people is the cost of living. And so if you're born on this island and looking to stay here and have housing here and build your roots here, how do you hope that fund helps people out and staying here and building their careers here?
I mean, that's something we're looking at, and that's kind of discussions that I've been having a lot with the internal team on. I mean, considering Hawaii has the highest cost of living, it's definitely detrimental to to kind of our economy here, and it forces Native Hawaiians to leave Hawaii, our home, to move to the mainland. So that's something that we're looking at putting together and creating programs or opportunities. And it's going to take a lot of work and I think a lot of capital to get it done. I called almost every state department in the state of Hawaii, and no one knew what an NHO was, what a Native Hawaiian organization was. And that surprised me because I started thinking that it wasn't real, or the opportunities weren't there. And then I started realizing that tribal organizations have land sovereignty. Native Alaskans have, natural resources, but Native Hawaiians, we have none. And so I think a lot of it was being able to generate or have the backing of large capital backing behind you, and that's something that I think as Native Hawaiians we don't have the opportunity for. But there's some key individuals out there who are willing to support, and it's about finding that. But that was the hardest part, was finding support, and that was not here on island. That was outside, because as you know, it's federally recognized, but the state, doesn't recognize it. So
you mentioned having that relationship during COVID with the loan relationship and accessing capital through the process. And that's one of the things I think a lot of Native American tribes had. Our clients had a huge struggle with, is that once COVID hit, there wasn't really a relationship with a lot of banks or financial institutions to get PPP or even bridge that gap. And so you had a number of a third of our clients went out of business that were in our system already because of COVID. And so I can imagine if you could speak to, I guess, the importance of having that financial relationship with any banking institution for a Native Hawaiian organization.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two conversations as a Native Hawaiian individual. Growing up thinking that, we all know it's important to make sure, that you have good credit, that you're preparing yourself financially. But when you don't see any opportunity in the future, those things end up sort of not mattering. And this was the first time as just an individual that I realized, wow, the opportunity is there, and if you realize the opportunity is there, then you're almost incentivized to make sure that you keep everything in line, make sure that you stay out of trouble, that you're able to financially set yourself up for the future. And that doesn't even necessarily mean being successful. It just means making sure that you're being as responsible as possible. And that, I think, was a big difference that I noticed, because most occupations that we have here, they don't they don't necessarily pertain to making sure that you have the cleanest track record financially, that you even have bank accounts, that you have. So it's sort of, I think it's an eye opener on that level.
Aloha, my name is Daphne Hutch. I am the founder and chairwoman of Kekoa Foundation.
And tell us a little bit about your background.
So my background, I studied political science in college, and then I worked as a defense contractor for many years in my family's business. So worked mostly with the Air Force and the Navy. We provided professional services and IT support.
And tell us a little bit, how long has your company been open?
So we're a very new NHO, about a year we've been in business. So Kekoa Foundation was founded in June of last year, and Makai LLC, which is our 8A for-profit company, was founded a month after that.
And tell us a little bit about the foundation. What does that mean for somebody who doesn't really know what that means?
So the foundation, our mission is to support the Native Hawaiian community through STEM and cultural initiatives. Really the primary objective is to help raise up the Native Hawaiian people through programming that honors and truly represents the Native Hawaiian language and culture.
And so you had mentioned that you came over here just by chance, and then how did that all come to play?
Yeah, so I'm actually based in Boston, even though I have family here in Hawaii. So I was planning a trip, and it just happened that everything lined up, so I was able to participate today.
Mm-hmm. And how many trips have you come to Hawaii?
So before COVID, I would come out here about once a year, but that kind of messed everything up Now that Kinaole Foundation is founded, I plan to come back at least every 6 months just to make sure that I engage with my local partners and really understand the needs of the community as I grow my program.
And what are some of the areas that you really want to focus on with the foundation?
So mostly I really want to focus on elementary and middle school STEM initiatives. So one project I'm pursuing is to set up a STEM club in some of the local underserved schools who may need a little bit of extra help. There's a big push in the Hawaiian community for workforce development and sort of upskilling in a lot of STEM and technical areas. But I think it's important that we start a little earlier in elementary school, especially with girls. They kind of get lost when they get into middle school and high school. So I want to make sure that through my foundation, I can help fill some of those gaps and really understand the needs and apply some resources in the most effective way.
How many schools do you think that you'll be touching?
So initially I want to work with one, make sure I have a really good relationship with them and a strong pilot program. But really the sky's the limit as far as how far we can go. I think there's a lot of need. When I talk to teachers and other educators, there certainly is a need for support like that. So once I sort of understand the right model and the right framework, I'd love to continue to grow, as far as I could.
Is there anything culturally connected to STEM that prevents girls, or do you feel like it's just an influence of the community at large?
I don't know culturally specifically. I think in our greater society right now, there's just a tendency for girls to sort of drop out of STEM fields when they get into middle school and continue in high school. It's not just a Native Hawaiian or Indigenous problem. It's sort of, all across the United States specifically. So I think, the need is certainly there. If there's a way for me to incorporate Native Hawaiian language and cultural ideals to help make some of these concepts more approachable, then I think that would be beneficial.
So your focus is like fourth grade, 9 through 11, 9, 10, 11-year-olds?
Yeah, I can't go too young because you need a little bit of foundation of skill, but fourth grade through about 8th grade, I think is a gap area that I can focus on. But, ideally I'd love to sort of see a class through as they grow. And, because we're still early, I think it will change, it will evolve depending on how we do, but that's my intention right now.
Tell us a little bit about your approach to curriculum development, or just how do you see it working? Is it during class time, or is it before and after school? Or
So a lot of it will be driven by the teachers themselves. They know exactly what their students need and what resources they have and what the gaps are. But my initial plan is to target an after-school program. I would love to bring in resources to support the kids immediately after school so they have somewhere to go. And then if the teachers can find a way to incorporate some of that into their curriculum, then perhaps that's part of their regular school day. But my intention initially is to sort of be in addition to what they're doing in school.
And your interest, how did you get interested in this? Is that something that you at that age were interested in and you didn't really find the help? That was more boys involved at that time, or?
A little bit. I was always interested in science and I kind of dropped off. I went the political science route instead of, traditional science. But I think my experience working, in defense, national security, and with the government at large, I see that there is certainly a need for that. And I also know within the Native Hawaiian community, there are limited opportunities that I think skills and programs like this can really help young students, boys and girls, as they grow, to be better prepared to enter the workforce.
And do you ever tie in traditional stories to help motivate the girls of this is part of our culture and this is where we come from, and then how it correlates to today?
Absolutely, that's my intention. So one of my great nonprofit partners right now is Purple Maya, and they do exactly that. They take local stories and language, and they integrate it into the lessons. They have a coding boot camp where it's half English, half Hawaiian, which is really interesting. And they weave in a lot of stories to make it a little bit more relevant and approachable.
That's great. Tell me a little bit more also about kind of your background.
So I grew up in a military family. We moved, both my parents were Marines, so I was born right outside Quantico in the DC area. We moved around the greater DC for a while and then up to Boston where my parents retired. So Boston is sort of where I grew up. It's home in the sense that, I spent most of my childhood there, but I have family in Hawaii and I've always felt a strong connection, back here as another home. And, now that we have the foundation established and we're starting to work towards things and build programming, it's a really emotional and personal journey for me as a Native Hawaiian person who did not grow up in Hawaii, to have this opportunity to connect now and understand the needs of my community and through this program really build resources to give back in a meaningful way. As a Native Hawaiian person who did not grow up in, the Native homeland, that's been a really interesting journey for me. Growing up in Boston, where there's just not a lot of Hawaiians, it was, my mom, my brother, and my sister and me. That was kind of my only experience and exposure there. So now, as I reconnect and I learn some of the challenges and problems here, I think Native Hawaiian-owned businesses can serve as great mentors and role models to other young entrepreneurs and Native Hawaiians who are looking to start their own business. I think the NHOA program is very powerful as a way to help companies break into and understand the federal government contracting market. It can be very, very complicated. So I think having a structure like that can be very useful. I also, I mentioned that some of the other NHOs that I've been connected with have been really great resources and mentors for me as I've started my journey. And so I feel an obligation to sort of pay that forward to others who come through, and even the next generation of Native Hawaiians as they come through school and prepare to go on. I want to be able to facilitate opportunities that they may not have even known were possible. So during COVID, Zoom and Teams, they're everyone's best friend. They're a way to connect. I found it difficult because I like to meet people in person to really establish that relationship. So I'm very thankful that I was able to travel here, with the restrictions relaxed a little bit. But, I think just leveraging the virtual tools that are available and trying to keep relationships that were established, fresh, was really the best we could do. Looking forward, I'd love to travel back here more and continue to build new relationships, but, we're just doing the best that we can.
And relatively, you had mentioned that your family had started and you kind of learned from there, and then you opened your organization. And what would you tell somebody who is hesitant about starting their own company? Or
I would say talk to a lot of other people who have done it before. It's all doable, but it is hard. For me personally, I don't feel work-life balance. It's all just one life. And I love that about it. I really love the work that we're doing and the mission. My husband's on board, my family's on board, so I have the support at home, to let me go do that. But it's a lot of long hours, it's a lot of sacrificing. I personally think it's worth it. So if you have that drive and motivation, then I encourage you to go do that. But just make sure you have a realistic, understanding of what is needed.
Besides COVID and pivoting in that arena, has there been other challenges that you've learned?
Specifically to federal contracting, there's a lot of challenges. There's different regulations. The way that you do your accounting is unique. Different cybersecurity certifications and requirements are emerging. The federal government cycle, it can be very slow. So in the commercial world, you could get a contract, within a few months. That's not really possible in the federal government, so it's a little different. But the government can be a really great customer once you understand, how to work with them. So I actively encourage people to just explore all different markets and find, the best customers that make sense for you. Growing up, I always knew I was Hawaiian. I identified as that as part of my identity. But I just didn't really know how to express it or how to connect because we were so far. And now I think, through this program, I'm able to really meet a lot of local leaders who understand on the ground exactly what the needs are, because my intention is to learn and absorb as much as I can so that whatever I build makes an impact and is sustainable. I don't want to just come in sort of as a mainlander in a sense, not being local here now. I don't want to come in and just assume that I think that I know what's right. I take a lot of responsibility and a lot of pride in understanding exactly, where the needs and the gaps are, who the best partners can be for me to help me achieve that. And then, allocating resources accordingly to make sure that whatever it is we build has a positive impact across the community.
Absolutely. And it's new for us as well. I mean, I don't know that the National Center in whole, what they've done, 50 years ago or up to this point at least. So I'm happy to be here to learn. And I never go into a Native community, even though I'm a Native as well, and because there is not a cookie cutter, and so I'm always learning and growing what other Native people and communities are doing. I'm sure that's very similar to kind of the path you're on right now.
Yeah. The words obligation come to mind, and responsibility, a sense for me that I have this great opportunity through the NHOA program and through leveraging 8A contracts, leveraging the experience that I have in government contracting. I have a really great opportunity to build resources, not only financially, but through a program and building a team. But I want to make sure it's so important to me that we build it in the right way and that we engage with the right partners and we allocate resources and funds in a way that has the most positive impact for the community. I'm really, really proud of what we've done thus far. I am really optimistic about what we can do. And I think this is just a great opportunity for me to continue to meet more people and understand not only where the Hawaiian community is now, but how I fit in that, and learn a little bit about who I am as well in this.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure for the future generations as well.
Absolutely. I think, there's no culture without the next generation. You need to preserve the language and the stories and the culture for it to live on. So if I can be part of that, if my foundation, can help build a legacy to help preserve some of that, then I think that's a great success.
We're here with Yuki at his store, Manoa, Honey, and Mead.
We have 4 to 5 different kinds of raw honey from different flower stores. That's the honeycomb. And we have a sampler set, really popular among those visitors that they can carry on. They don't have to check in. And you also get to try 3 varieties of honey. This is Kiabe cream honey. It makes nice creamy crystallization. And this is the collaboration with local rum distillery. We aged the honey in their rum barrel. And this is our most popular mead. It's a Lilikoi session. It's 7.6 alcohol and has a nice smooth bubble. So this is our latest release of our mead. Yeah, Sleeping Potion is the lavender mead. We infuse a lot of herbs, different ingredients.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got started?
I was I'm from Japan, and I was a beekeeper back in Japan. And we've started this business in 2014, coming from Japan, and taking over existing beekeeping business that the beekeeper was just old and he was about to retire. So me and my wife took over the business. And since then, we've been keeping the bees, and mainly we were producing honey products. But from last year, during the pandemic, we've started making honey wine, which is also known as mead.
And so where are the bees at?
So we have apiaries around all over this island, from up in the North Shore to southern side of the island to west side. We have about 10 different locations.
And you've been in business how long now?
For 8 years.
8 years. And during the pandemic, was that beneficial for you to really think about new types of development, or how did you manage to produce or continue through the pandemic?
Yeah, I can say it was beneficial now, but during that chaos, it was such a stress and a lot of trial and error, how to recover the loss of the revenue that we had in a normal setting. So we've tried different product coming out of honey, like infusing health beneficial ingredients. But one big thing that we've made it is the honey wine that we were preparing about maybe 2-3 years before that the pandemic happens. It takes a while to get the liquor license, or refining or fine-tuning the recipes, and doing the product development takes a while. But we weren't ready, at the time of pandemic, but we really rushed to release first batch of honey wine, or the mead, in the pandemic.
And where else can people find your location here? Either do you go to farmer markets, or?
Yeah, we have a farmers market booth first and third Saturdays of the month at KCC Community College in Townside. And we also distribute our honey to Whole Foods or Foodland, those groceries. Yeah.
Oh, nice. And tell us a little bit about the medicinal or the health benefits of honey.
Right. Honey is considered as a medicine, for a long time, from ancient time. You could use it as, topical, just healing the wounds, or even, soothing the throat. And also, fun part is that you could infuse different ingredients to the honey. Some of them we mix interesting ingredients like chamomile or kava. Kava is sort of Polynesian culture that they're taking like a tea, or just to relax, or have rituals, or they took kava. But I mix with honey and chamomile. That gives a little relaxation feeling when you take that. So honey can be sort of like a vessel just to bring those health beneficial ingredients, together with others,
And I know the bee colonies, when you take honey, sometimes it helps with allergies and other things, because the bees are local, and so they're pollinating different plants, and so a lot of times we have different allergies to different plants at different times of the season.
Right. So we even harvest the bee pollen, by ourselves. So one of our style, that mana, we mix bee pollen with the honey. So it's a strong booster for who has allergies, or although that it's not really scientifically proven that bee pollen really heals the allergies and stuff, but a lot of people say that they got better. So yeah, it's a good stuff.
What would you say to a young entrepreneur that had a dream of starting a business?
Stick with the passion and never give up. Just keep doing it.
And how did you? What was your interest in starting this company?
I graduated art school, and I meant to become artist, and looking for those art themes that I could follow or I could pursue for years. I encountered the beekeeping. So I didn't come from that actual agricultural side of the bees or honey, I found the beekeeping. I thought that was one of the beautiful actions, or the things that the people are doing for centuries, never changed from Egyptian era. And I thought that kind of clicked my passion of just creating the art, that I just have to learn, how to keep the bees and become a beekeeper, so that I thought I could create some art out of it. But as you enter the business, or learning how to keep the bees or how to sell the honey, or you're just going into more of a business side, of selling honeys or marketings and stuff. But in the heart, or in the bottom, that I have the passion that I just wanted to express the beauty of relationship between bees, plants, and humans, that they're being in a triangle relationship that been years for. How can I express that beauty as an art? That's my maybe ultimate goal, why I'm doing this.
Mm-hmm. And you do have, with your branding, and the setup here is lovely, and I can see the work that you've put into it, and some of your art background, if you will, with your logo and your branding.
So when you make art, 99% of the work that you make is trash. You work so hard, you put everything you can into the art piece, but ended up sort of like disposing. Especially I was in a sculpture major. So you make a big piece, and after the exhibition, nowhere to put. So seeing those sort of like fate of those art pieces, if you're not incredible, exceptional, talented artist, ended up being thrown away of your passions. And also I was looking for something more sustainable way of expressing things, not only making things, but the concept that is carrying the message or beauty of it that goes forever. And I was more into sustainable agricultures, or I was looking for actions, beautiful actions that kind of withstands the years of expectation, or years that you could present. And I heard in Japan that there's a people that follow the flowers from southern islands of Japan, following the flowers going up to the northern states, where following the flowers and harvesting the honey. And I thought, that's very beautiful way of living, and the products that they make is liquid gold. It's just honey, and I never seen anybody who hates honey, and the honey that lasts centuries, like literally that you could get the honey from the pyramids that was still edible. So how can we make, as an artist, that much of a beautiful stuff, like we were sort of taught to create art piece that withstands like just long time. But I thought that action of beekeeping itself is already art. So I just needed to dive in and just wanted to, initially I was trying to get in there and extract some beauty of it and have a 1 or 2 exhibition, and maybe I was gonna go out. But that hole was so deep that I couldn't come out, and I'm still struggling to get out and to do the art, like more pure art, out of it. But
when you first started with your business development, were there organizations that you might have reached out to, such as the SBA or the Small Business Development Centers?
No.
Or was it just word of mouth and trial and error and your own research?
A lot of trial and errors, yeah. But I guess Hawaii is a small island, so everybody, and also have a mentality of helping each other. So interesting part maybe for our situation is that we have a lot of Japanese immigrants coming to Hawaii, and they're now that around like third to fourth generation. And those people that see us coming from Japan and doing agricultural practices, that they might saw us as a more of a, you know, their grandfathers or great grandfathers that doing that type of work. So they're very, very helpful for us that, you know, introducing to one of the others to, you know, USDA or, you know, Department of Ag, or there was a lot of word of mouth reference and help from those communities. Last year, we started this honey wine series of honey wine, and that really helped us financially, but also seeing more people are excited about new products or creativity of, you know, what can be made out of honey. So I think our next step or next goal that I wanted to make is we've been making mostly like pure honey, like raw honey, and present it as just as that. But that really clicked me that, oh, I can make a lot of creative products out of honey that people wouldn't think of, or, you know, so even the mead or honey infusions or different ways of using the honey in the daily life and creating the bigger space. You know, this is tiny shop, but having like tasting room that customer can experience, like all about honey or the bees, or, you know, that themed I would say retail shop, or tasting room.
A wine tasting room, yes. Those are really fun destinations also to
That's my goal right now. So mead is one of the oldest alcohol beverage in the world, but it was almost being forgotten for centuries.
I didn't know that.
Right, so I think it was well preserved. You know, the custom of drinking mead has been preserved in Northern Europe. So a lot of people think that's a Viking drinks, or it's more like a medieval European type of drink. But now that people are seeing mead as more modern craft beverages than the traditional style, and what we wanted to create is something suitable for Hawaii. So something refreshing. Our mead is carbonated, it's bubbly, it's like sparkling wine. And also we use a lot of local fruits. So it's just a pure honey from the islands, and also the fruits coming from the land that goes blended together well, fermented, and gives a nice refreshment. You know, that's the style of our mead. And which can be, you know, there's a various style of mead that's suitable for each regions. And that would be fun if you're traveling, you know, find out what kind of style of mead your destination offers.
Absolutely. So I see that you have three different types of bottling there. Can you tell me a little bit about the differences between those four labels?
Right. Each color represents the the fruit. So pineapple, obviously, that's yellow, and honey and pineapple is cold fermented and has a nice balance of acidity. You know, honey, and all of them not too sweet, but all of them are, you know, sparkling style. Say Lilico is passion fruit, and that's our most popular one. It's almost like a champagne or prosecco feeling. And the green one is the ginger that we use the ginger from the Big Island. So I think it's not that many company that makes the alcohol purely ingredients from Hawaii. Our honey is from here, water of course, and the fruits or like gingers that coming from Hawaiian Islands. It feels really like nice, comfortable buzz that you get from this. I don't know, because it's not foreign ingredients, or it's everything is natural. That's it's almost like meant to be, So it's not that harsh. It's just the buzz that you get it just really resonates with the mild breeze, or the climate that we have. Something that's really perfect. Yeah.
I could see possibly also maybe getting into the cosmetic industry, lotion. Or
right, yeah.
So many benefits. And of course the bees are so important to the whole environment.
Right, true.
We're here today with Alana, and I know that you were Entrepreneur of the Year last year in 2020.
Yes, I was.
Tell us your name and how did you get here?
Okay, well, my name is Alana. Tag Aloha is Hawaii's first fair trade certified company, and we design organic cotton bags and accessories. And what's really important to us is our Give Back program, where we support local nonprofits that are here in Hawaii. So that is kind of everything about us and who we are. We actually got started with Whole Foods Market back in 2013. Bree was with me since the beginning. And we just started out making very simple grocery shopping bags kind of thing for the beach. And it quickly exploded into something kind of beyond our wildest dreams, as you can see. And it's been steadily increasing since then. So we have a line, like I was saying, of all organic cotton fair trade certified bags, accessories, towels, all kinds of things that we have here at Whole Foods, as well as online and in other boutiques and stores locally here in Hawaii.
Tell us about any challenges you've had during COVID.
Yes, well, we are among the many businesses that were really impacted by COVID. As I'm sure you know, Hawaii is very dependent on tourism. And so when tourism obviously took a dive when it completely stopped, we really had to reevaluate our business model and really focus on our local audience, as well as still reaching out to people that wanted to be here, wanted to be in the islands, but couldn't. So we put a lot of focus onto our digital marketing and putting our products out online, as well as finding different arenas to still have our products be a part of. And then we also went back to the design process and really have started to change everything that we're doing. And we're really excited because a part of our new line is coming out in a couple of weeks. We've been collaborating with local artists, so we're really trying to hone in on taking care of items that we know that people here are going to want and that they're going to need to live here in Hawaii.
And tell us about some of these designs.
Okay, well, I mean, living in beautiful Hawaii is what inspires, what motivates us. And what we try to do is create items that remind you of your experience in Hawaii, whether it's watching the sunset, sand between your toes, going for a surf. We want our products to remind you, especially when you're home, of that very special time that you had and the amazing place that Hawaii is. We absolutely love living in Hawaii. We love everything about it, and so it's very important to us that we present something that is authentic and also, like I was saying earlier, give back to our community. We give back to 2 organizations that are local here on Oahu. It's the Surfrider Foundation, which protect our oceans, and they work tirelessly to do just that, as well as Access Surf. They make programs available for veterans and people with disabilities to get in the ocean, surf, do all kinds of things that is really therapeutic for them. And it's something that's very near and dear to our hearts. So that kind of taking care of the Aina, taking care of our ohana, our family, our immediate family, and our family here in Hawaii is what motivates and inspires us.
I was just going to say, now who was the motivator? Who motivated you or inspired you to become an entrepreneur?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Well, I feel like it's always been a part of who I was. I started making clothes for Beanie Babies when I was in the 2nd grade and was selling them to my friends. was. So it's always kind of been a part of who I was, and I've always wanted to, go into fashion and apparel of some kind. And our partnership with Whole Foods really catapulted that, and we're so grateful to them for giving us this platform to do just that. And we've loved growing with them, growing this category, creating this category with them, as well as doing the things that we do outside of Whole Foods with our own personal line that we do online and in the boutiques that I was talking about earlier too.
Right, and I was going to ask now, how can people find you?
Okay, well, tagaloha.com, that's the easiest way. And if they are interested in getting items that are specific here to Whole Foods, because you can only get them here, they're not available anywhere else, you can still contact us directly, and we can, along with Bree's help and everyone here, we can get them to you, no problem. We started back in 2013 with Whole Foods. We started just making simple grocery bags, simple beach bags, and it kind of catapulted from there. So what started with a simple bag similar to this, now we have aprons, towels, mugs, clutches, keychains, stickers, backpacks, bum bags, lunch bags, kind of you name it. So that's really what got us started, and from that we were able to create various lines for Whole Foods and for other customers as well as what we do, just our line that we do outside of that you can see on our website, of bags, of clutches, of backpacks, beach bum bags, and we have some really exciting stuff coming in the next couple of weeks. It's still a little bit of a secret, so I can't exactly spill it just yet, but we're really excited about that. We've collaborated with some local artists, and we're so looking forward to kind of stepping into a new sphere for Tagaloha, if you will. Nice. So we've just, getting back to your question about COVID and how it's impacted us. I mean, of course, yes, it was very difficult, but we're survivors, and we weren't going to let this take us down. So we just promised ourselves that we were going to make it out of it, and that we were going to come up with things that were going to kind of grow our business and also expand basically our offerings. And we're pretty proud of ourselves. It's just we're families. It's myself, my business partner, my husband, and my business partner's wife, as you can see over there. And we have kids. We're raising our kids here, and that's everything to us, is living here in Hawaii and taking care of our babies, raising our babies, and taking care of the Aina, taking care of the land and its people. So that's us. That's what is our biggest motivator, our inspiration, our everything.
And where else might we see you in the near future?
Okay, well, that's a great question. We do a lot of local markets here on the islands, in Honolulu as well as in Kailua. We are in a few new boutiques that just opened up in the last couple of months, which I'm so excited for, because yay for new business and yay for those new opportunities. We are available in boutiques in Kailua, on Maui, on the Big Island, and we're looking kind of to expand in that regard and kind of give more of our independent operators something that's more unique for them.
What would you say to a young entrepreneur or anyone interested in getting into small business?
Well, don't let anything stop you. We started with nothing but a credit card and a dream, hoping that it would take off, and it really has, and I'm so grateful for that. I mean, it's been the biggest dream come true, and I would say that you just have to persevere and know that it's going to be tough, and know that it's not going to be easy, but the payoff is always worth it in the end. And if you believe in what you're doing and you actually have a plan in place, you'll definitely be able to achieve it. Look for what isn't out there yet and create something that's unique.
And I'm sure you know a little bit about the marketing, the 5 Ps of marketing. Is there anything else that you want to tell an entrepreneur out there? Like, what has been most beneficial for you to learn?
I see. Well, working with other people in our community here in Hawaii, it's a small island in more ways than one, and just I've found it to be so beneficial to learn from other entrepreneurs just like me, learn where the pain points are, learn where strengths are, where wins are, and I've really would advise to anybody to get with, communities that are starting small business, that are all about small business, learn from each other, help each other grow. And that has been, I would say, the biggest help for us, for sure.
Now, did you grow up here on the island?
I didn't, no. I've lived here since I was 19, turning 20, but my husband is from here. My baby was born here, and so Hawaii it does feel like home for me, and it's really important to me that everything that I do is going towards taking care of Hawaii, because we love it here so much, and I feel very privileged, very grateful to be able to call this place home.
Nice, thank you. Tell us a little bit about the different braiding here I see.
Oh, the braiding?
The braiding.
Oh, the braiding. I see. All right.
Different.
Well, we basically have, just here alone, we've got our deluxe bags and our rope totes. And so it's really just a different price point. But with our deluxe bag, I would say it is our most popular bag here at Whole Foods. And the line that we have outside of Whole Foods is very similar in look and shape. Anyways, our deluxe bags are easily adjustable, so you can make them long, short.
Nice. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah,
and they're easy to wear.
Exactly.
And you can wash them.
Very easy to wash. We try to make everything cute, something that you'd want to take with you to more than just the beach, and that's kind of our impetus. Every time we go to design something, that's kind of like what we think about, or how we're going to, how would someone use this? Where would they wear this to? What design would this go with, kind of thing.
Yeah, and it works great for groceries too.
Yes, it does. Yeah, exactly.